My name is Sergio Aranda, Marketing Programs Manager at eBuilder, and I'd like to thank our presenter, Tim McCurley with the KLMK Group, for sharing some of his insights on IPD. Thank you, Tim. And
Thank you,
before turning the sorry about that, Tim. Before turning the mic over, I'd like to provide our guest with more info on Tim's background. Tim is a principal consultant with KLMK Group and brings over 10 years of experience helping clients with project scheduling, budget development and management, contract negotiation, and team management and coordination. Many leading medical centers, such as Owensboro Medical Health System, All Children's Hospital, Potomac Hospital, and Upper Chesapeake Health System, have relied on Tim's skills and abilities to manage their capital facility project. Tim holds a Bachelor of Science in Building Construction from Auburn University. And Tim, before I turn it over to you, I just wanted to remind our audience that we encourage their comments and questions both during and after the presentation. We've got a good number of health systems and universities participating, along with prominent construction, architecture, and engineering companies. So the bottom line is that there's a lot of knowledge on the other side of the phone. So we encourage, again, everyone to chime in and share their thoughts as they relate to the information that you're about to hear. So, Tim, without any further delay, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sergio. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. I hope to enlighten you just a little bit about a project in Kentucky that we were able to do in integrated project delivery. So I'll jump right into the presentation here. A colleague of mine shared this photo and quote with me a couple years ago, and I always like to show this, but it's Alan Shepard when he was asked about flying on the Saturn rocket. He said it's a very sobering feeling being up in space and realizing that your safety factor is determined by the lowest bidder on a government contract. And I think just to how that relates here is at some point along the way we have moved to let's see how cheap we can do something and get it done as fast as we possibly can. And I think we're losing value to our clients, value to our owners. So we think integrated project delivery is a method to be able to address that. So key points and key takeaways in this presentation, we're going to talk about achieving that value for our clients through leadership, collaboration, the process tools we used, some of the results that we have seen, and we'll talk a little bit about some keys to success and lessons learned. Briefly, just about the project. Owensboro Health. Owensboro, Kentucky is in rural western Kentucky. It's on the Ohio River. It's the third largest city in the state. It is an oil and agricultural industry. It's a revitalizing city, and there are some publications that have it as one of the top 100 places to live. The hospital in Owensboro, as you can see, two pictures here. One on the left shows the site as an aerial photo in 1974, and again on the right, 2006. And as you can tell just by comparing the two pictures, a lot happened in those 30 years, a lot of expansion, and that put a stress on the site. There was some more expansion that was needed in 2006. Some discussion was going on about, do we expand in place here? Do we renovate this facility? How are we going to do that? Our site is really constrained by a lot of different issues. There's a railroad track in the north part of the site. We really don't have any space available to do expansion. So started thinking about other challenges that this hospital had, and these aren't really necessarily unique to a lot of other places. Site boundaries becomes an issue, especially in inner city hospitals. Flooding was a concern here. The location of the helipad happened to be over the operating rooms. So when a helicopter would come land, they would actually have to shut down operating rooms because the air intake would draw in exhaust from the helicopter. So problems there, floor-to-floor height limitations. Many buildings built in the 60s and 50s and 60s were built with 13-foot floor-to-floor height if you were lucky. And as systems have become more complicated. Air flow has become more and more important. Those ceilings start coming down a little lower. So lots of issues there. And then again, many other issues that a lot of hospitals see. So the board, in their oversight, started looking at, should we renovate? Should we replace? Studies were looked at about the existing facility, and this just shows a study that shows where the buildings were built, how they were built, and the dates that they were built. So you'll notice 1938 was one of the oldest buildings in the facility, and it's right in the middle, right in the core, right where all the activity is, right where all the major utilities flow through the building. So as they were thinking about expanding, it really started to hit home that now may be the time to replace. So as further studies were completed and they compared to renovation versus replacement, a telling sign on this slide here is that bottom one. Renovation, 7 years or more. It was probably on the more side. Replacement, 4.5 to 5 years. I can also tell you that I've done a renovation of a hospital in place, and it is inconvenient, not only for the staff, for the patients, for everyone involved. There's a great deal of safety and risk associated with that. So, comparing the two is very important when you start thinking about these type of decisions. But it's also important to keep in mind that there's a great deal of risk associated with renovation. Additionally, looked at the cost of renovating versus replacement. And when you look at this in large numbers, the cost to replace was only projected at $52 million more than to renovate the building. So finally, the board and the administration made the decision, let's go ahead and replace the hospital. They started out with site selection. They looked at 15 different sites around the city, eventually landing on a 160-acre property in the city, just on the edge of the city limits, that give it a greater access locally and regionally as hospitals start to become more regional centers than local centers. So, talking just a little bit about IPD and what is IPD. IPD obviously stands for Integrated Project Delivery. I'm not going to go into a great detail of the background on IPD. I think that's been going around for some time. I'm going to talk more specifically about how IPD affected our project and how we were able to use it. So just briefly, what is it not? IPD is not BIM software. We hear a lot about it. Well, I'm an IPD project because I use BIM software. It's not any type of software system. It's not the Toyota production system applied to construction. It has a lot of similarities there, and it was probably more so born out of that line of thinking. But it's not a repackaged system. It's not redesign, build, repackaged. And most importantly, and is really a good point to get across, it's not necessarily cheap, and it is not necessarily a utopia environment. IPD projects still have problems. IPD projects all have budget issues. What we're trying to do is to better seat ourselves in a position to address all of those issues in a more thoughtful, more refined way of doing it, recognizing that projects have problems. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. So what is IPD exactly? It's absolutely relational. It's a project delivery approach integrating people, systems, business structures, and practices. We feel like, especially on a hospital, in a healthcare environment, collaboration is absolutely necessary, and it's necessary early on in the project. I can tell you that collaboration is going to happen whatever project method you choose to do. In a traditional environment, that collaboration could occur near the end of the project when you're trying to finalize the construction and move in. And that collaboration really reveals itself in the with change orders and changes at the end of the project. So we want to get that collaboration done very early on in the project. And that, again, is a goal of IPD. And using lean principles, it's not necessarily lean when you talk about IPD. If you're lean, doesn't mean you're an IPD project. IPD does use lean principles to reduce the waste, optimizing your efficiency with your fabrication, construction, occupancy. So that's a very easy concept to understand, but can be very difficult to implement. Again, we're trying to change the way people think, and humans are unfortunately creatures of habit. If you have done any studies on lean, you've seen this slide here before, but just going back to the collaboration, the importance of that, learning in action, using your project, the network of commitments. Trust is very important. In IPD, you must be able to trust your team members. You must be able to trust everyone that is sorry, the 12 o'clock train just decided to come through.
No problem.
Okay, so moving on this project, the owner's rationale for IPD. So why did the owner decide to go that path? One thing that this owner was very keenly aware of is the benefits of lean. They had already instituted a lean program in their hospital, and they felt like if they could harness that on a construction project, it would greatly increase their chances of getting the goals that they were seeking to achieve. They also understood they needed help with this project. They are keenly aware of how to manage and run a hospital, but a construction project is something that they felt like they needed help with. They wanted to make sure the community was involved, and also, and this is probably a statement for every project that's ever been. They had limited funds and big lofty goals. One day I'd like to work on a project that had unlimited funds to go along with those big goals. But so they felt like that, we needed to be able to have a process available that would give us the best opportunity of reaching those big goals with staying within our limited funds. And this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That previous slide I noted, the oldest building there was in 1938. It was built. So 80 years ago, almost 80 years ago, someone decided that they needed to build something. And here we are again, deciding to build something. So they had to get it right. They couldn't afford not to get it right. And so IPD was something that they felt like would be able to help them do that. So currently our project here, we have a 781,000 square foot hospital, 134,000 square foot medical office building. It's a $431 million total budget, 316 of which is construction budget on a 160-acre site, 477 patient beds, and 16 operating rooms. So it's a good-sized project. So the core concept of IPD, it really goes back to let's share that risk amongst the team players. And if we share that risk amongst the team players, then that would lead to motivation, which leads to achieving greater results for the client, for the owner, for everyone involved. So we can talk about how the great benefits of IPD, but how do we actually hit that mark? And it really goes back to what we're trying to do as a traditional project delivery level of common understanding. On this slide here, you can see how once a project, the y-axis here is the common understanding, the x-axis is the timeline of schematic design, design development, and construction documents. Traditionally, we hire an architect, he designs something. We hire an engineer, he works along with the architect to design something. At some point, we'll hire a construction manager, he'll do a few estimates, and then we'll start construction. And it's not until very late in the game that everybody really realizes what we're doing, which is almost an exercise in futility, because it's hard to really start doing something when you don't really know what you're trying to do. So planning makes it very difficult. So here's what IPD tries to do. It tries to take that level of common understanding and take that curve and move it back, so that very early on, everyone is keenly aware of what the project is trying to become. And I also want to point out on here that it's very important, and it's not shown here, the owner's user groups, the owner's interests should also be a star on here. As I think about this, I'm going to revise this slide next time. But that has to be key in this process as well. The owner is just as important as anyone else in achieving those goals. So how do we achieve that reliability as far as the budget and estimating? As everyone is aware, there's always budget concerns associated with a project. And you have, at these estimating intervals, you have these huge bumps in the estimate. And so we have to work to get those estimates back under control, and that leads to a longer process. If I'm spending more time trying to figure out how I can reduce the cost, that means more time designing, that means more time on the back end when projects get complete. So the upper curve here shows that traditional method. The lower curve shows what we're trying to do with those budgets and reduce that bump as much as we possibly can, so that we know what our budgets are, and when we have these budgeting intervals, we can help levelize those bumps in the road.
Tim, and if I could ask you a question, because we're getting a lot of feedback from the audience, by the way, which is very good. In your experience, would you say that it is more costly, more expensive to implement integrated project delivery as a process as opposed to some of the more traditional processes out there? For some of the people that maybe are more experienced with CM, if somebody's making the switch, let's say, with CM at risk to IPD, from that perspective, is it more costly? You will invest on the front end to achieve greater results on the back end. So what the difference is you will spend funds earlier by hiring the CMs, the trade contractors. You really want those guys engaged, and one way to get them engaged is to pay them. You can get them to do some stuff for free, but you're going to have to pay those guys early on. So you're investing in that intellect early on, so you can get achieve those savings on the back end. We'll actually talk about that a little bit further down the road, but that is absolutely something that needs to be made aware of. So is it more costly? I think the answer is no. It's not more costly. Is it more costly on the front end than it normally would be in a traditional method? Yes, it is. All righty, thank you.
Okay. So continuing on, who the team members are responsible for implementing all of this and making all of this happen. We've talked about all of these great things and how are we going to achieve that. So here I'm going to talk about my team members on this project. HGA was our architect, Turner Universal, our contractor, Smith Beckman Reed, our engineer, and then Owensboro Health as the owner makes up the core team of the project. And each entity had a specific team member that was charged to be a part of that core team. And the core team's responsibility is the project. It's very important that we start to change our thinking in an IPD world about it's not my silo. A lot of times architects, engineers, construction managers, even the owner gets in their silo and they don't want to get out of it. Integrated project delivery breaks down those silos and to change your mindset. It's the project budget. It's the project meeting. We all are working for the project, and our goals are all for the project. It's not our own individual goals, but we have project goals. So it's very important to change that mindset And it's probably one of the hardest things to do in an integrated project delivery is to try to change that mindset.
Well,
so
and if I could interrupt you again, because we have another interesting observation, which is one that I've heard before, by the way, as it relates to IPD and how it may differ from other delivery processes. Some people are under the impression that IPD and design build are essentially the same. So the question is it accurate to explain that true IPD is achieved through working under an integrated form of agreement? In other words, is it the contractual agreement that makes a project an IPD project?
Not necessarily. We have projects that we're doing that we call them IPD light, which means that you have the same processes and tools that an IPD project would use, but the contractual arrangement may be more traditional. So you run the project like it's an IPD project, but the contractual arrangement is sort of a more traditional approach. So there are ways to run an IPD project without that contractual arrangement, but I will say that to get a true IPD project, the integrated form of agreement, whatever, there's a lot of agreements out there, but you would need that integrated form of agreement to get a true IPD project. Again, because the goal is that risk, sharing that risk amongst team members, motivating them to move towards a better project. And let's face it, at the end of the day, contractual agreements help that. You can't contract trust. You can't write down trust. Those are things that are the intangibles that you have to build amongst your team members. But you can go a long way of doing that with an arrangement, integrated form of agreement. So,
well, thank you for sharing that, and I think I'm getting a lot of mixed responses from the group. So we have some people that have actually participated in IPD, and we'll see how their experience, I guess, contrasts with yours. So I'll let you go ahead and continue. Thank you.
Okay. So how were we able to change that line of thinking, change the way we met very early on and identified those gaps? We each team member we sat down and discussed extensively what works well, what doesn't work well, and we put together processes and the processes that we're going to use on this project in order to achieve the owner's goals. HGA, our architect, does a really good job of putting together a patient experience. It's something that seems to be unique to them. And they were able to put together a lot of information early on using this patient experience. And from that, we were able to put together requests for proposals. And those requests for proposals were issued to all of our trade contractors. So again, we're very early on in the project issuing RFPs to trade contractors in order to bring them on board. And to bring them on board, we had decided to split up the overall construction budget in these various ways here. And again, this could be, your project may be totally different. But for our project, this is how we split up the cost. So after we brought those trade contractors on board, we were able to sort of divvy up the project in these forms. In that form are component teams. Our component teams, as you see here, we identified things that we felt like were important to the project, the different trades important to the project. I had someone tell me a long time ago, if you want to get buy-in from someone, make them an owner of it. So the civil engineer, for example, on the site becomes the leader of the site component team. And this component team is not only responsible for the design of that area of his responsibility, he's also responsible for the schedule. He's also responsible for that budget. So and that's something when we go back to over-educating team members, this is not something they're used to. They're not used to being responsible for that. We have to do a really good job early on in setting the process and making sure they understand what they're responsible for and how we're going to achieve those results. Component teams are also cross-populated so that project architects have a really good understanding of what the site and civil team's doing. Even medical equipment planners having a good understanding of the electrical. So we cross-pollinate the teams to help us better make sure that the component teams have a good understanding of that. So those component teams were built. They were assigned weekly schedules. They had lead team members and a team leader, and they had supporting members. And again, as I said, they had budgets assigned to that as well. The component team meeting.
We have another question, Tim, that sounds it's pretty interesting here. It says actually a comment. Both question and comment. Sharing the risk seems to create a diffuse sense of leadership. With one contract, who is really in charge of the project? Leadership is key to success. Bad leadership, bad outcome. Good leadership, good outcome. Ultimately, the owner pays wanting to know the ROI. So I guess that's don't know if you have an opinion one way or another on that, but
I do. The core team, and maybe I didn't talk about this enough, but the core team is responsible for the schedule, for the budget, for everything associated with the success of the project. Those core team members, like I say, on our project, we had 5 core team members. The hospital had a representative, Turner, HGA, SSR, and KLMK as the owner's representative on the project. So they are the ones that are ultimately responsible for the success of the project, responsible for those budgets. And it was absolutely their decision-making that made the project a success.
Now, as a follow-up,
go ahead.
As a follow-up to that, somebody else, and this is one of the major universities on the West Coast, wants to know, how did you manage the trade contractors bidding on early SD, DD drawings, and how did you deal with the cost increases as the drawings progressed to construction drawings?
Well, it's an interesting question. We've had that asked a lot because you are bidding a set of drawings that are really very schematic. As a matter of fact, they were early schematics. But keeping them, and this goes back to trust. You know, can you trust these guys? And you have to be able to do that. So trust is very important. But our contractors that we brought on board, we did do some checking intermittently as we were going through the design process at some of our major intervals. We would have peer reviews of some of those budget estimates. Our contractor, Turner, did a lot of peer review just to make sure we were getting a value that we had thought we were going to get early on. So it's certainly an issue that needs to be addressed, but again, it's something that we felt like bringing those guys in early helps them have a better understanding of that project when we get to finalizing construction documents and getting final pricing. And you know, I think that our budgets show that. You know, I could go into a lot of detail about how you know, comparisons showed that we were getting the value that we thought we were going to get. So it's a very difficult thing to do, but trust is really important there.
And I think before I let you continue now, one of that what you just talked about as far as trust. Somebody else asked, does the owner have difficulty releasing the reins, so to speak, for the component teams? And again, it just gets back to that issue of trust, right?
It does. It very much gets back to the issue of trust. Owners do have a difficult time releasing reins. This owner didn't. This owner is a very forward-thinking entity. They're very much aware of getting the right people in the right position so that they can set themselves up for success. So that can be difficult for a lot of owners to want to let that go a little bit. Now, they're still represented. It's not like they're saying, call us when it's ready. They're very much represented in each of the component teams, and certainly on the core group as well as being the overall management for the project. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
We have a lot of questions, but I'm going to let you keep going because I know that we want to get a lot of material to get through.
Okay. So the component team meetings, again, we focused on those. The component team leaders certainly had tools in their possession. Pull schedules, we used a lot of pull scheduling. Integration events is where component team leaders were all brought together and discussed issues amongst as a project rather than just the component team. And then our contractor did a really good job of being a representative at each one of those component teams and using a budget detail tracking device to be able to address any concerns that the component teams were picking up as far as cost concerns or design concerns. And then HGA, our architect, kept the integration pace going in order for everybody to be assured to be able to hit the targets of document issuance. So our target value design and our budgets, when we start talking about our component teams and how they were able to manage their own budget, like I said, we did have issues. But we knew those issues up front. We didn't have to wait until a GMP estimate was finished before we knew if we had any issues or not. We knew we had issues as they come up because we had our construction manager, our trade contractors on all these component teams. They were able to collaborate with design firms so that we could identify those issues early and address them early. This is just one example here of with using our component teams to pull out a wall. We didn't feel like that, the architect didn't feel like that if we pull out this wall, it's really going to cost us a whole lot of money. And that was confirmed by our construction trade contractors being on board, our component teams being on board. We were able to have confidence in that, and with confidence early on in the project so that, again, at GMP, we were not surprised in having to make changes on the back end. And then that leads us to another tool that we use, prefabrication and BIM. BIM is building information modeling, and it's relatively new to the construction field. We used it extensively here. Turner Universal had a BIM coordinator on site full time. I think that is an absolute requirement on a project of this size, is to have a fully staffed BIM coordination team in order for that to be successful. But this one example, you can see the two photos here. The photo on the right is the 3D model. The photo on the left is the actual work in place. The BIM model I think we had around 13,000 conflicts in our BIM model that we were able to resolve before one piece of pipe, one piece of ductwork was put in place. So that gives you confidence in what you're doing. Confidence in knowing that pipe, as I install it there on the left picture, is precisely where it needs to be. The ductwork guys can prefabricate all of his ductwork in a better environment, in a controlled environment, in a warehouse. We used a lot of off-site warehouse to do a lot of the construction, a lot of the assembly, a lot of the prefabrication, which leads to a safer, more controlled environment rather than doing it out on the site. So we did not have a lot of cutting and patching going on when we were going through the rough end phase of the project. So prefabrication, again, a big tool, BIM is a big tool, and a prefabrication is a result of having a BIM software on the project. Another tool that was used user design reports. Our architect created these reports to give the user groups, the hospital user group staff, confidence that they have addressed all of their issues. And these are just simple reports. There's no magic wand here, but these reports associated with the previous floor plan you saw, so that they could show, hey, here's the big ideas that you told us about, and here's how we've addressed those big ideas and put them on paper. So outcomes. Where are we now? We're absolutely on time. We're under budget. We have a lot of examples about how we were able to get the owner added value. Just one of those, we added 55,000 square feet of building space with no budget increase at all. And the reason we were able to do that, again, we were so confident in our budget early on that we knew that we could add that space without increasing the budget. We didn't have to wait till GMP. I know a lot of times owners will put a few things in their pocket to say, hey, if we can afford it near the end of the project, we'll do this. And we did not have to do that on this project at all. We were able to incorporate those early on so that they do not become changes down the road towards the end of a project. When you do that, realize, hey, I've got a little extra budget. I can spend this money on something that I really wanted to begin with. We were able to get all of that kind of stuff in early on. We had building elements that you wouldn't be able to achieve in a traditional process, like a natural German stone on the outside of the building. Our patient rooms have antimicrobial properties in the tile and all the hardware and sink fixtures. That's a premium cost that the hospital really wanted to achieve. And again, in the traditional process, you might not make that decision until later in the construction when you feel like you've got the funds available. We knew what our budget was. We knew we had the funds available. We implemented that early, and it was just a part of the project.
Well, since you're talking about that for biggest stuff for a moment, somebody wanted to know when is the GMP delivered to the owner for approval, and how did the GMP align with the owner's construction budget?
Well, we completed the GMP. It was we were in the end of construction about 6 months when we finished up the GMP. And how that aligned with the owner's construction budget, it was the owner's construction budget as far as the GMP amount. It was not off at all. As far if the question was about the GMP came out in at X and the owner's budget was Y, well, the way we built the budget, it was the construction. I don't know how to answer that other than to say we didn't have any issues with our budget not matching the GMP. Again, everybody knew what the budget was. We knew what the GMP was going to be. We knew that before we got the GMP. Was it precisely on the number? No, it wasn't. We did have to do a couple of things to move that under budget, but we were very confident that little bump I showed earlier in the traditional process and how we were able to reduce that bump, it was something we were able to manage within.
So who set the target value budget to start the process was another follow-up question.
The core team set the target value. The owner said, here's the project I want. Here's the funds I have available. Well, give me a budget that I can do that within. And so the core team met, divided all of that up, and that's what we worked towards. We worked towards a budget and the goals.
Gotcha. Excellent, Tim. And by the way, the questions keep coming in. I'll let you continue because I know we still got more information to cover.
Okay. So this is just a picture of the site, very early on master plan, and this is the project as it stands today. You can see the hospital tower. We have a medical office building. We're a building adjacent to it, rapidly finishing up construction. We're heavily in equipment, furniture placement, and we're preparing for our patient move, which is on June the 1st. this year. Just another photo of the project. This actually is a mock-up room, and mock-up rooms aren't anything new. And I say this, and I'm bringing this up only because a lot of times owners don't want to invest money into mock-up rooms, just like they don't want to invest money into hiring a trade contractor to be on board a team to provide insight on this. I've got all of you smart consultants on the team, but you should be able to do that. And in some ways, they're correct. They should be able to do that. The mock-up room that we used, the core team decided to proceed with the mock-up room, and we decided that it was important enough to build a fully functional mock-up room. So, short of having a license to use this room, you could have placed a patient in this room and actually served that patient. So we were able, and this was very eye-opening to the staff, and we felt like it was something that was absolutely needed. I wish I had a picture, and I don't have it, but I wish I had a picture of what this started out as. Because when we started out and what we finished up with was two totally different rooms. And it really didn't sink in that how that design, the early on design was proceeding until we built the mock-up room. We were able to bring all the staff out, do test scenarios, really work the room before we built one single room in the hospital itself. So that was the mock-up room, and this was the room as it stands today. I couldn't get a picture because the sun was coming through on the other side, so I couldn't get a picture from the same perspective. But again, this is a nurse's station outside of every patient room. We were able to mock that up, fully functional, live environment. The hospital actually used this as part of their training. But for us on the construction side, we were able to test all of the scenarios and all of the ideas that we had before we had done anything on the construction side. And that's the real live nurse alcove right there. Same thing, this is a collaboration hub. That's the live one. Okay, and then so what we haven't really talked a lot about is IPD during the construction phase. We talk a lot about IPD early on in the project and the value and the benefits that it provides early on in the project, and it does. And that's the real goal of IPD, is to have that early on process so that the construction phase is easier to do. But the IPD role during the construction phase doesn't end when you get to that phase. It continues on. So the core team that I mentioned earlier is still responsible for maintaining the control of the project budget, the schedule. It continued as the decision-making authority, continued using the full scheduling methods to make sure everything stayed on course. You still have RFIs, submittals, all of those things that are associated with the project as it's going through construction. But we still use, well, one thing we did not do here that maybe we could have went back and done a little differently is kept those component teams together. Once we got to construction phase, we released the component teams, and the core team took on the responsibilities of maintaining all of those component team roles. Maybe we could have done that differently here. I don't know that it would have been greatly beneficial, but we decided that it would be best for the project to release the component teams once we got into the construction phase. But I would say that, again, IPD is geared towards early on in the project, making that better. The construction phase is more of, it's more of the same, but we still continue on the IPD concept. So keys to success in an IPD project, things that we've learned, obviously you've got to have a clear plan. You've got to work on that plan early on in the process. You've got to be able to, a lot of times we seem like we just start and maybe the plan will kind of figure itself out as we go along. You can't do that on an IPD project. You have to be able to set yourself up for success early on. And in order to do that, you have to be able to invest in your team and do this integration early. if you don't, you can miss IPD if you don't invest into that early. Focus on your process before starting work. Again, getting your clear plan. Anticipate and varying buy-in and monitor closely. This is a new concept. There's a lot of still a lot of thought out there that, hey, the traditional process works just fine. Even there are teams that you can hire that would work on your project that may still have those thoughts. So you have to monitor that closely and make sure that your team members are progressing to buy into the IPD concept. Achieving a clear project definition and pre-design. Again, that goes back to having a clear plan early. Re-emphasize your goals and construction documents. It's very important to do that so that as you move through the construction phase, you remember what got you to where you were so you can finish strong. Over-education of the team. Again, this is a new concept. You have to do a lot of education with your team members. Sit down in your integration sessions and make sure that everybody restates what their goals are of the project. We did a lot of education with our team members, with our component teams, so that they really understood what their roles were and their responsibilities were. And then the anticipation of the resource commitment required. This just goes back to the cost of bringing in those trade contractors early, bringing in the CMs, the engineers early. There's a lot more meetings involved with like engineers and consultants early on in the project than would be in a traditional process. And PM software, you've got to have a good way to share that information. You must have a good way to have your team members be able to work off one platform. I think that's very important. Here, we did not necessarily do that. Here, we did not have one platform here. We had several platforms to get everything that we needed, but I really feel like that having your a one platform PM software is a must. And then IPD is not a one-size-fits-all model. If you were going to build a shopping mall, it probably doesn't work. We think it works well in healthcare because of the collaboration that is necessary early on in the project. A higher level of leadership from all your participants. Again, those component team leaders, that's not something they're used to, being responsible for those budgets. It's not something that a medical equipment planner is used to being responsible for. So it's very important that you get the team members and they have the ability to have that higher level of leadership and the responsibility to take on that. We didn't talk a lot about the IFOA, but you've got to be able, there's several forms of integrated form of agreement that you can use, but you've got to be able to settle on that early. I've seemed like I've mentioned this several times, but that cash flow model shifting from the front end, I don't think you can say it enough, that in order to have true IPD, you have to have that cash flow, that cash investment on the front end, and again, the goal of achieving back-end return on investment. And the timing of your process and integrating trade contracting team can make or break the IPD value equation. If you don't invest in that team early, if you don't invest in the process and figuring that out early, you don't have an IPD project and you're not going to achieve those results. So with that, Sergio, that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to turn it back to you. I think we're going to answer some questions, but appreciate everyone's attention.
Thank you, Tim. I think we've got a lot of great insights, both in the form of questions and comments. So I'll share those with you as we go through it. So somebody wanted to know who led the team integration methodology, and if you used outside facilitator.
We didn't use an outside facilitator. The core team was responsible for setting those integration plans in place, and we used one of the core team members as a facilitator at an integration event. So at each one of the integration events, one of the core team members was in charge of facilitating that. Now you can do that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I would say you can do. There are ways to bring in outside consultants to just do the facilitation of those events. It's something that we have done on some projects, as well as be that facilitator.
And then somebody made a comment, and this comes from a large architectural design firm that has apparently a lot of experience with IPD projects, that mentioned should set up a leadership team that is made up of the primary signers to the IPD contract.
Well, yes, absolutely. We did that here. The signers, the primary signers of the IPD agreement, we had an executive, we called it an executive core team, but that is exactly what he's referring to there. The executive core team's responsibilities were only to general oversight and executive oversight of the project, and to solve issues that the core team couldn't solve. If there was a disagreement or if you will, a split decision on a certain issue, the executive core team was presented with that information, and they made the final decision on the project.
Okay. And then the question is, what do you see as traditional costs that a CM might charge, or do you try and roll that into the CM's general conditions?
Well, we didn't roll that into the CM's general conditions here. We set it up as a pre-construction arrangement. I think that it is certainly prudent to go ahead and roll that into the general conditions for your contractor. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't do that. But you know, that's something that as your core group, as you put that together, you know, that's a decision you need to make that fits best with your project and your project goals and however your budgeting is set up.
And again, to confirm, this wasn't a true IPD project from them. By true, I mean maybe that's the wrong term, but by that I mean that you guys actually had an IPD contract. Is that right?
Yes, we had an IPD contract.
Okay. And this next question is something that I've actually heard at a couple of different KLMK presentations, where people are asking, is there a project cost threshold where IPD becomes economical and maybe where it doesn't make sense? So is that 5 million, 10 million, 50 million, or 500 million?
Well, there's probably some others in our firm that's done a little bit more research on that than I have. I certainly don't think that it's very valuable and beneficial on a smaller scale project. You know, probably something smaller than $50 million. Maybe it's not as valuable and beneficial, but that's when you go to more of an IPD light arrangement, where you run the project like an IPD project, you just don't have that IFOA agreement set in place. And the reason that you wouldn't want to go to that effort is because there's a lot of insurance requirements, and that's a whole other presentation to discuss professional liability insurance and how that's addressed with, you know, you basically got a construction manager who's providing design assistance. That's not something that they're used to doing. So you have to be able to, the owner has to provide that professional liability insurance on the project. So if you're running a small project, doesn't mean you can't do IPD. You can still do the process of IPD. But I think that you've got to really consider the risk with the agreements and the insurance costs and things of that nature.
Got it. Okay, now somebody asked, what were the bidding requirements that the bidders bid on? I was a little bit confused by that question, but I'm not sure if it makes sense if you could answer that.
What were the bidding requirements that the bidders bid on?
Correct.
If we're talking about our major trade contractors, like I said, we put together a 4-ring binder of information that we had established. It included drawings, a schematic design set of drawings. It included narratives from the engineering firms, and it included a lot of the goals in the patient experience information that was gathered by the architect. So there was a lot of information in there, and when you hand that 4-ring binder to a trade contractor, they don't. You're going to have to sit down and talk to them about how you want pricing. And they were able to give pricing. They were all able to give pricing, and it turned out to be accurate pricing on what we were trying to do. But it was just mainly based on their experience. And this goes back to, you have to be able to pre-qualify your trade contractors before you invite them to bid. It has to be, like in our case, a healthcare electrical contractor or mechanical contractor. They've had to have had experience on projects, extensive experience on projects in the past, and they have to have a good understanding of what it takes to build a hospital. Because, if you, going back to that whole trust thing, the trust is a very, very, very important in a project like this. So in order to give yourself confidence and give the core team and then the client confidence that these guys have what it takes, you've got to be able to demonstrate that.
So how did you coordinate, contract approval process with the IPD process? What challenges did you face?
Contract approval process?
Contractor approval process.
If we're talking, I guess if we're again talking.
I'm sorry, I misread that question. How did you coordinate the certificate of need approval process with the IPD process? What challenges did you face?
Actually, here the certificate of need process was really taken on by the hospital themselves. In Kentucky, it is an issue. It is a process that you have to go through, but it's not as extensive as it is in some states. So the hospital just took that on themselves, and it was something that the core team tracked. It was something that the core team needed to monitor, but it really wasn't that difficult here. In some other states, you might make that more of an integral process and part of the core team's responsibilities. It just wasn't needed here.
And somebody that I think has experience with IPD projects is asking, from an insurance perspective, do you think it's important to have a project policy rather than having each member of the team provide their own policy?
It is absolutely important to have a project policy. It's one of the key ingredients to an effective IPD project is to have that project policy in place. And we've got contacts that if whoever asked that question wants to talk a little bit more about that, we've got some insurance contacts that we can get you in touch with to really help understand why that's important. But it's a long. It's another presentation.
And by the way, I think you invited some friends because somebody wanted you to know that Michael, Leanne, and the team at TLC say hello. Great job.
That's good. That's good.
All right, so I think we've got through most. I'm sorry, what was that, Tim?
I hope they're enjoying sunny Florida.
Well, if they're close to where I'm at in Fort Lauderdale, I'm sure they are. So one of your other colleagues that's mentioned it was about 17 degrees where he was at, so not as much fun, I guess. Yeah. So just wanted to ask, are you going to be okay sharing the slides for this presentation, like a PDF version, I guess, with everybody? Because I've received quite a few requests for those.
Yes, that's something we can arrange.
Okay, so we'll make that available next week. So thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate your time and the information you shared. And based on the number of questions and comments that we received, I think the feedback will be very positive for this presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
So I'd like to thank everybody that participated. And again, if you have any other questions that went unanswered during the session, I will look through those and forward them to Tim as well. And hopefully he can have an opportunity to respond to you directly. So again, thank you very much for participating today. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.